I came home early, ready to surprise my husband, but the smell of gardenia and that low shared laughter ruined everything. I stood outside the bathroom, listening to the destruction of my 8-year marriage, but it was worse than I thought. It wasn't just a fling. I heard her voice, the woman who smiled at me every Tuesday, mentioning the Rose account. This wasn't infidelity, it was a calculated ambush. Why was my husband plotting my professional ruin with my biggest enemy? They thought I was a heartbroken young wife, but as I opened that door, they were about to meet the woman who personally funded his entire startup 3 years ago. Who do you think you're fighting, Damon? You're about to find out. The silence in the grand minimalist penthouse apartment we'd bought 2 years ago, a monument to the swift, hard-won success Damon and I had built, had always been a comforting presence, but today, it felt like an echoing void, a hollow stage setting for a tragedy I hadn't yet named. I'd flown back from the San Francisco Tech Conference 3 days early, the closing on the massive Series B funding round going smoother than expected, leaving me, Auntie Rose, a 34-year-old tech investor and founder of the successful Nova venture capital firm, with a burning desire to just be with my husband. But the moment the door clicked shut behind me, the air shifted heavy and wrong, like the pressure drop before a system-wide crash, and my perfectly scripted romantic reunion crumbled into dust. Damon's bespoke Italian shoes, the ones he claimed he'd left at his downtown office, were sitting too neatly by the sleek, modern coat rack, and the faint, sweet scent of gardenia, a perfume I absolutely never wore, hung in the air, a silent, fragrant witness. I convinced myself it was the delivery person's cologne, a desperate, flimsy rationalization my conscious mind threw up to protect the fragile architecture of my life, but the nagging certainty, that familiar prickle of female intuition that had saved me from bad portfolio investments more times than I could count, was already screaming in the dark corners of my soul. I moved through the open-plan foyer, past the abstract sculpture we both loved, a predator on silent, padded feet, feeling the cool concrete floor beneath my Dior flats, each step an unnerving tick-tock closer to the truth, a truth I wasn't sure I could survive but knew I was already powerful enough to bury, because my greatest strength was the one thing Damon never saw, my ability to forgive nothing and to wait for everything, and this whole unsettling stillness was simply the calm before my own perfectly orchestrated storm. I could hear the rain shower running upstairs in our master suite, a steady hypnotic cascade that was supposed to sound relaxing but now felt like a drowning soundtrack, masking something vile and hidden, confirming that Damon was home and undeniably not alone. I crept up the floating steel staircase, the plush runner muffling my steps, my hand clutching the cold, sleek railing, and with every ascending step, the temperature in the apartment seemed to drop, leaving me with a chilling, almost supernatural premonition of ruin and betrayal. The gardenia scent grew stronger, a cloying, sickly sweet cloud that choked the air and solidified the sickening realization that my initial intuition was already proving to be a horrific, unwelcome reality, painting a picture of domestic horror in stark, unforgiving detail. I paused outside our bedroom, the familiar electronic lock looking alien and menacing, feeling a tremor run through my hand as I instinctively reached for my phone, not to call for help, but to discreetly initiate the video recorder, securing the evidence before the confrontation, transforming myself from a heartbroken wife into a calculating executor. My mind, usually a fortress of calm, razor-sharp logic, was a churning mess of fragmented memories. Damon's sudden, unexplained trip to Austin last month, the strange late-night text messages he quickly deleted, the inexplicable luxury car he'd recently bought me that felt more like a guilt offering than a token of affection, all now clicking into a horrifyingly coherent pattern. I could hear the distinct, muffled murmur of voices coming from the adjacent master bathroom, too low to discern the words, but the sheer, agonizing intimacy of the sound, the playful undertones, the shared, comfortable rhythm of conversation, was enough to slice through my last defenses, leaving me emotionally exposed and utterly hollowed out, but simultaneously fueling a cold, precise rage that felt less like grief and more like tactical planning, because I hadn't survived the cutthroat world of venture capital just to be a victim in my own house, and whatever was behind that door was about to learn that Auntie Rose never just gets mad, she gets even, and she always plays the long game. The knowledge that I was about to confront the death of my 8-year marriage was a tangible, icy weight settling over my shoulders, pressing down on me until I felt simultaneously heavy with despair and light with a terrifying, untethered freedom, a sensation of having nothing left to lose that made me infinitely dangerous. The murmuring ceased abruptly, replaced by a splash and that distinct, shared, low laughter. A sound so casual, so completely devoid of the required secrecy or shame, that it felt like a deliberate, vicious mockery of my entire existence. A neon sign flashing "You are a fool" directly into my soul. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the scent of gardenia now mixed with the sharp, clean aroma of Damon's expensive cedarwood body wash. A sickening cocktail of domestic familiarity and gut-wrenching betrayal that brought a sudden blinding clarity to my purpose. The tears I felt welling up were not tears of weakness or defeat. They were tears of pure, distilled venom. A promise of retribution whispered silently to the gods of scorned women and financial ruin, hardening the resolve in my gaze. I moved with agonizing slowness, my hand dropping to the heavy geometric bronze sculpture I'd seen sitting on the hall table, its weight suddenly reassuring, a silent promise of leverage, and maybe, just maybe, a physical outlet for the immense, crushing pain I felt beginning to consume me whole. Why now? I thought bitterly, why, when we were finally talking about launching the joint venture fund and starting a family? The lie wasn't just the fact of another woman. The lie was the timing, the colossal, soul-shattering disrespect of destroying everything when we were closer than ever to securing our financial and personal legacy, the quiet, dignified stability I had worked myself to the bone to earn. I was a respected woman, a pillar of the tech community, a mentor, a fact Damon had always leaned on, but in this moment I was simply the fool standing outside the bathroom, a woman about to be publicly, privately humiliated, and the only thing that mattered now was making sure that the humiliation was not mine alone, because the game was changing and I was about to become the dealer. My fingers finally curled around the cool stainless steel doorknob, its perfect polish and solid weight a cruel contrast to the hollowness in my chest, and I took one last, agonizing moment to etch the pristine, before image of my life into my memory, knowing that the second I turned that knob everything would become a never again. I leaned my ear against the wood, catching fragments of the conversation, a clipped, familiar female voice mentioning the Rose account and Damon's low, responding rumble about tonight's investor meeting, words so benign yet so completely out of context for a casual, bubbly romp that they added a terrifying new dimension to the unfolding horror. This wasn't just a physical betrayal. This was a meeting, a discussion, a conversation that sounded far too close to a business dealing or worse, a meticulously planned conspiracy, adding layers of calculated, premeditated cruelty to the sheer, gut-punching infidelity. The simple act of turning the knob, of pushing past the last barrier, now felt like detonating a bomb, not just discovering a fire, because the stakes had inexplicably, dangerously risen from a standard, cheating husband scandal to something far more sinister and complex. My mind raced, frantically piecing together the anomalies. Damon's recent, unusual attention to the financials of my latest seed fund, his sudden insistence on reviewing my personal investment portfolio, the way he'd pressured me to sign those vague, updated operational agreements just last week, all of it now clicking into a mosaic of planned financial devastation. I swallowed hard, the bitterness of betrayal now mixed with the acrid taste of fear and the potent adrenaline of a woman realizing she's been playing chess with a snake who only just showed his fangs. And this wasn't just about a woman in a tub. It was about the why and the what else they were doing together. The dark, hidden agenda beneath the soapy surface. The question of who she was had been replaced by the more urgent, terrifying question of what she knew, and what they planned to take from me. But I was anti-Rose, and no one, especially not the man I raised from a startup idea to a successful CEO, was going to rob me of my dignity or my empire. I threw the door open with a force that rattled the bathroom tiles, the steel knob slamming against the wall with a deafening crack that instantly silenced the laughter and turned the idyllic steam-filled scene into a snapshot of naked, unadulterated panic. But the shock that hit me was not the sight of Damon's exposed body, though that was certainly jarring, but the woman who was sitting across from him, legs entwined beneath the bubbles, her face a mask of mortified, wide-eyed terror and guilt. It wasn't a mistress, a secretary, or a random associate. It was Alara Vance, the elegant, ruthless 38-year-old CEO of Vance Capital, my biggest professional competitor, and the woman who had been meeting me for power lunches and women in tech panels every Tuesday for the past 2 years, smiling with perfect empathetic warmth every single time. The realization, the utter soul-shattering depth of the duplicity, hit me with the physical force of a wrecking ball. This wasn't just an affair, it was a calculated long-term operational collaboration between my husband and my chief professional adversary, a sickening fusion of private betrayal and professional sabotage. Damon, flailing to cover himself, stammered a pathetic, fragmented plea, but his words were drowned out by the metallic shriek of the high-end towel rack I ripped from the wall, the sound of bending steel perfectly mirroring the sound of my life unraveling, confirming that the stakes were far higher than mere infidelity. This was a coup, a hostile takeover of my personal and professional life. Alara, her carefully constructed composure shattered, simply stared at me, her perfect smile replaced by a look of predatory defeat. The very woman who praised my vision and strength at every gala now revealed as the viper who had been strategically feeding on the heart of my home and empire. A devastating revelation that turned my emotional pain into a surgical incandescent fury, because I wasn't just betrayed, I was targeted, and now the hunt, the real one, the one that would leave nothing but ashes in its wake, had officially begun. The air in the bathroom was thick not just with steam, but with the suffocating stench of 2 exposed, cornered rats, and the immediate terrifying thought that flashed through my mind was not how I would divorce Damon, but how I would ensure that Ms. Alara Vance's entire, carefully constructed fund came crashing down with an exquisite public finality that would make the tech blogs salivate for decades. Damon, having recovered slightly, tried the classic gaslighting approach, shouting, "Auntie, this isn't what it looks like. We were discussing a joint investment in Quantum Corp. It's complicated." A lie so transparent and insulting that it actually made me laugh, a cold, sharp, manic sound that echoed off the imported porcelain, a laugh that sounded more like a death knell than genuine amusement, because I knew a discussion didn't require 2 naked bodies and gardenia perfume. My focus, however, was already laser-sharp on Alara, the ally who had systematically extracted privileged information about my fund's weak spots, my upcoming bids, and even my key hire's personal vulnerabilities during those countless supportive lunches we shared. And now I could see the whole meticulously constructed web of deceit, a strategy so comprehensive it could only have been planned over months. I stepped back, the bronze sculpture still clutched in my hand, dropping my gaze from their pathetic nudity to a small sleek voice recorder sitting innocently on the vanity counter, its tiny red light blinking, an irrefutable piece of evidence that instantly escalated the situation from adultery to conspiracy and espionage. The look of pure, gut-wrenching dread on Alara's face as her eyes followed mine to the recorder confirmed my worst fears. They weren't just sleeping together. They were documenting something, and the terrifying question was whether they were documenting Damon's exit strategy from our marriage, or whether they were recording a strategy to financially ruin me entirely, a possibility that instantly transformed my pain into a steely, unshakable will for ultimate, irreversible revenge. I didn't need to pick up the voice recorder. The mere sight of it was enough to shatter the last remnants of my wifely devotion and ignite the cold, strategic engine of my professional fury, confirming that I was not just dealing with a moral crime, but a calculated corporate assault on everything I had painstakingly built since I was a young, ambitious MBA graduate. Damon, seeing the shift in my eyes, that terrifying analytical glint that meant I was no longer emotionally invested but tactically engaged, began to truly plead, his voice cracking with a fear that was clearly centered on his next funding round, not my broken heart, confirming that his entire existence was tied to the carefully constructed facade he had just destroyed, a weakness I instantly filed away as a primary leverage point. I spoke for the first time, my voice low, perfectly calm, and completely devoid of human warmth, a tone that had terrified startup founders for years. "Get dressed, Damon. Both of you. We are going downstairs to the office, and you are going to tell me exactly what the Rose account means, and why Ms. Vance here has been so interested in my venture portfolio's exit strategies for the last 6 months." The mention of my fund's sensitive data, information only Damon and I were privy to, sucked the remaining air out of the room, leaving Alara hyperventilating on the edge of the tub, Her sophisticated mask completely melted into a puddle of terrified inadequacy, revealing the true desperate predator beneath the veneer of mentorship. The painful truth was this: Damon didn't just cheat on me. He conspired against me with the one person I had actively, and foolishly, trusted to be a true ally in a cutthroat, male-dominated world, and that deep foundational betrayal was far more corrosive than the physical act, transforming my home into a battleground and my decades-long marriage into a carefully concealed, highly profitable intelligence operation. A realization that solidified my resolve to execute a retribution so comprehensive and spectacular that it would be studied in business schools for its sheer, undeniable audacity. I retreated from the bathroom, leaving the two traitors scrambling for towels and excuses in the wreckage of their rendezvous, and descended the stairs not as a victim, but as a general surveying the battlefield, the adrenaline pumping a cold, clear focus into my veins, allowing me to see the penthouse and the whole enterprise not as a home, but as a strategic asset, a chessboard where I held the ultimate, yet-to-be-revealed piece. I didn't wait in the living room. I walked directly into Damon's immaculate, glass and steel home office, his sanctuary, and began my work with the surgical precision of a seasoned operative, knowing that every single second I spent organizing was a second they spent panicking upstairs, a psychological torture that was just the beginning of their punishment. My first move was to locate his personal encrypted laptop, which I found locked and hidden beneath a stack of beta testing notes, a rookie mistake, and the ease with which I bypassed his unbreakable password, the birthday of his first forgotten startup, a detail I'd feigned disinterest in for years, confirmed his fundamental fatal arrogance. He truly believed I wasn't paying attention. I wasn't just gathering evidence of infidelity. I was looking for the digital footprint of their conspiracy: emails, wire transfers, encrypted files, the hard proof that would allow me to dismantle not just their relationship, but their entire professional lives, securing a legal, devastating checkmate. The irony was palpable. Damon had always praised my lack of interest in the technical side of his coding, a complacency I had deliberately cultivated, all the while taking a private, intensive course in digital forensics and corporate surveillance, a hidden skill set I developed precisely because I knew that in the world of high-tech finance, your greatest defense is your ability to see the betrayal coming. A preparation that now felt like a divine karmic reward for my lifetime of silent, strategic observation, turning a moment of agonizing betrayal into a meticulously pre-planned, devastating counterattack. The quiet hum of Damon's high-powered computer filled the air as I executed the data mirror, a silent, relentless process that was siphoning the entirety of his recent communications and financial activities onto an encrypted drive I carried in my designer clutch, the same clutch that held the keys to the new beach house intended as a surprise, a searing symbol of his monstrous deceit. Every click of the keyboard, every successful progress bar on the screen, felt like a nail being hammered into the coffin of his career, a precise and gratifying act of retribution that was far more satisfying than any screaming match or broken crockery ever could have been, because I was dealing in facts, not emotions, and facts were my most lethal weapons. I discovered a series of suspiciously large, round-number wire transfers over the past 3 months, each one labeled with vague, nonspecific descriptions like development fee or advisory retainer, but all leading directly to a shell corporation I immediately recognized, one that had been rumored in the industry to be a front for Ilara Vance's aggressive and arguably unethical venture debt placements. The depth of the conspiracy was now terrifyingly clear. This wasn't just a clandestine affair. Damon was financially compromised, selling internal information to my rival, actively undermining my funds and our shared legitimate businesses, a betrayal that transcended marriage and plunged into the murky depths of corporate espionage and white-collar crime. I heard the tentative creak of the stairs, the sound of 2 people moving with the heavy, reluctant dread of those walking to their execution, and I quickly minimized the screens, placing the laptop exactly where I'd found it, the encrypted drive secured in my inner pocket, ready to play the role of the heartbroken, clueless wife one final time. They were coming down to offer their meager, contemptible excuses, armed with lies and half-truths, but I was already armed with their complete digital confession, and the stage was perfectly set for the most satisfying, financially devastating confrontation of my entire formidable career. Damon and Ilara shuffled into the office, A picture of pathetic, hastily dressed shame, their bodies wrapped in oversized bathrobes that only emphasized their vulnerability, and Damon, true to form, immediately launched into a rambling, desperate justification about one mistake and the stresses of the market, pleading with his eyes for the mercy he knew he hadn't earned, but I simply held up my hand, silencing him with a gesture that communicated centuries of accumulated, justifiable female rage. "Don't insult my intelligence, Damon," I stated, my voice so low it was barely a whisper, yet it cut through the room like a razor blade. "The voice recorder on the vanity? The one you both forgot to hide? Still on. And I heard everything." This was a lie, a strategic manipulation. The recorder was on, but I hadn't been close enough to hear more than fragments. But the instant, shared, white-faced terror of both traitors confirmed my deepest suspicion. They weren't just plotting against my fund, they were planning to use my recent health scare as leverage. Alara, suddenly finding her voice in a panicked gasp, blurted out the devastating truth. "He just needed the doctor's notes, Auntie, to challenge your operational control. He said you were emotionally unstable after the miscarriage." The revelation that they were not just stealing my money, but weaponizing my recent private grief, attempting to have me declared mentally unfit to control my own assets because of my emotional vulnerability, was a soul-shattering blow that wiped away the last shreds of my composure, transforming my cold, strategic fury into a seismic eruption of pure, righteous, and completely focused hatred. The depth of that malicious, premeditated cruelty, the willingness of my husband to use my personal agony against me for profit, confirmed that the man I married was truly dead, replaced by a greedy, callous monster, and the time for strategy was over, replaced by the time for immediate, overwhelming, and utterly devastating, merciless retribution. The silence that followed Alara's desperate, accidental confession was more thunderous than any scream, a vacuum where the air used to be, and I felt a wave of icy dizziness wash over me, the devastating implication of their plot, my most private pain weaponized, bringing me closer to a physical breakdown than any amount of infidelity ever could. I fought it down instantly, channeling the sheer, visceral pain into a core of unyielding, diamond-hard resolve, the memory of my silent, agonizing recovery now fueling a white-hot, consuming need to absolutely flatten them both, professionally and personally, until nothing remained of their contemptible lives. Damon, realizing the magnitude of Alara's slip, lunged at her with a pathetic, enraged cry of "You idiot!" But I stepped between them, my small, imposing figure radiating a power so cold and complete that it stopped them both in their tracks, like a sudden, insurmountable wall of pure will. I didn't raise my voice, but the words I spoke were the most venomous I have ever uttered, cutting deep into the heart of their exposed, greedy ambition. "You were going to use my grief to take my life's work? You were going to declare me unfit? You thought the one thing I valued more than my happiness, my reputation, was simply yours for the taking." The utter devastation of the discovery, the realization that they had seen my greatest vulnerability as their greatest opportunity, was an emotional cataclysm, stripping away every single protective layer I had built over 6 decades, leaving me raw, bleeding, but terrifyingly, powerfully unburdened by any remaining sentimentality. The tears finally came, not the controlled, subtle tears of a professional woman, but large, scalding drops of pure, unadulterated devastation that landed on the steel floor like drops of acid. Yet even through the haze of my emotional collapse, the cold, clear voice of my inner executive whispered a single precise instruction: "Act now. Cut off the lifeline." I straightened my spine, wiping the acid tears from my face with a steady hand, the small, decisive movement signaling the end of the victim phase and the immediate beginning of the operation, a terrifying transformation from grieving wife to corporate executioner. My eyes, once warm and full of life, were now flat, cold pools of strategic calculation, fixing Damon with a stare that promised a future of unmitigated financial misery. "I didn't fly back early for a romantic surprise, Damon," I stated, the lie perfectly delivered to maintain my tactical advantage. "I flew back because I already knew something was terribly wrong. I've had your accounts monitored for weeks, not months, and every single one of those development fee wire transfers to Alara's shell company. I have the full, signed receipts, the correspondence, and the digital paper trail that links them to corporate espionage and misappropriation of firm funds. The sheer, audacious scope of my counter-surveillance paralyzed them, shattering the last illusion of their power and replacing it with the dawning horrific certainty of their impending absolute ruin. Because they had only accounted for my emotional response, never my professional capacity for total warfare. I reached into my clutch not for the keys to the beach house, but for a slim official-looking document, which I tossed onto Damon's desk with a resounding slap, the paper a symbol of their doom. This is a cease and desist order, effective immediately, legally freezing every single joint account, personal and business, including the offshore holding company you thought was so cleverly hidden. As of 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time, you have no access to anything, and your company server login has been electronically deactivated. The sudden catastrophic reality, the instantaneous total financial castration, made Damon physically sway, clutching the edge of the desk for support, a devastating visible confirmation that their carefully laid plans had been decimated by a single perfectly timed preemptive strike, and the look of sheer panic defeat on Alara's face confirmed that she, too, was now trapped in a rapidly sinking ship with a completely compromised co-conspirator. Alara, a powerful, ruthless woman in her own right, was the first to regain her composure, albeit a fragile, desperate semblance of it, instantly pivoting from the personal to the legal. "This is slander, Auntie. We'll tie you up in court for years. You can't prove a negotiation is a crime." Her defiance, though pathetic, was exactly what I had been waiting for. A final necessary challenge that allowed me to unleash the next decisive phase of my strategic annihilation, confirming that she still profoundly misunderstood the level of professional preparedness I had brought to this confrontation. "You're absolutely right, Alara," I countered, the calmness in my voice a terrifying counterpoint to the fury in my eyes. "A negotiation isn't a crime, but the documentation of insider trading is, as is the use of a shell corporation for illegal wire transfers and tax evasion, and every single one of those transactions is tied to my husband's signature." I paused, allowing the weight of the accusation to sink in, watching the blood drain from Damon's face as he finally realized the true, devastating nature of the trap I'd sprung. His complicity was the cornerstone of my defense, and the key to my revenge. "This," I continued, lifting a second, thicker file from my clutch, a file meticulously prepared by my team of white-collar crime attorneys, "is a formal notification to the SEC and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, filed 30 minutes ago from my private jet, detailing the full extent of the fraudulent transactions, with all the necessary digital evidence I just secured from this very laptop, implicating both of you directly in federal felonies. The choice is yours. You can fight me in a messy public divorce that will see both of you in orange jumpsuits, or Damon can sign this pre-drafted, no-contest divorce agreement, transferring all remaining non-frozen assets, including the penthouse, to my name, and I will only then consider delaying the full, unredacted submission of evidence to the federal authorities, a small yet necessary complication in their meticulously constructed world of betrayal. The realization that they were not just caught, but utterly dismantled, facing not only personal ruin but federal prison time, broke the last shred of their resistance, their initial panic replaced by a deep, suffocating sense of inevitable total defeat, and the look of absolute, soul-crushing terror on Damon's face was more satisfying than any amount of money could ever be. Alara, ever the pragmatist, was already assessing the damage, her eyes darting between me and Damon, searching for an exit strategy, a sign of weakness, but finding only the implacable, granite-like certainty of my unshakable resolve. "Sign it, Damon," she hissed, her former warmth replaced by a cold, desperate self-preservation. "Sign the damn papers. You can always appeal later." A final, desperate attempt at deceit that I instantly and surgically crushed, ensuring her complicity in his final humiliating surrender. "He can't appeal later, Alara," I interjected, a small, utterly triumphant smile finally touching my lips, the first genuine expression of joy since I'd smelled the gardenia, "because the agreement includes a non-disclosure and a complete forfeiture of all future claims, notarized by my personal attorney who is currently waiting on a conference call. Your choice is very simple. Sign away your future, or spend it sharing a cell with a woman you just betrayed. The sheer, undeniable power of my position, the culmination of years of silent preparation and meticulous professional excellence, was overwhelming, and Damon, a man who had built his entire identity on financial control, finally reached for the pen, his hand shaking uncontrollably, his signature on the document a painful permanent seal on the destruction of his life and the utter, complete vindication of my preemptive, ruthless retaliation, a final definitive act of submission that felt like the sweetest, most deserved revenge a powerful woman could ever enact on the man who thought her love was less valuable than his greedy ambition. Damon scribbled his signature, the ink a dark, indelible stain on the white paper that finalized his immediate, total surrender and the transfer of everything we had built to the sole, undisputed ownership of Auntie Rose. And as he pushed the documents back across the massive mahogany desk, a tiny, almost imperceptible silver key slid out from under his bathrobe sleeve, a key that wasn't for his office or the penthouse, but one I instantly recognized as the key to the encrypted bank box in Zurich, a box that only held the original, handwritten, prenuptial agreement he'd signed before his company's launch, an agreement that explicitly guaranteed him 80% of my net worth in the event of my proven infidelity. The documents he'd just signed now superseded that prenup, making it worthless, but the very existence of the key, hidden even now, told the true story. The affair with Alara was merely the performance, the distraction, while the real cold-blooded plot was not to steal my money, but to use the affair to trigger the prenup, making my heartbreak his biggest payday. The sheer, deep-seated planning of his greed was breathtaking, confirming that even in defeat, the man had an exit strategy for his exit strategy. I did not move toward the key, nor did I acknowledge it. I simply let the silence fill the room, allowing Damon and Alara to drown in the full catastrophic weight of their failure. Alara, utterly defeated, stood up, her robe pulled tight, her eyes vacant. "It's over, Damon," she muttered. Her voice scraped raw. The alliance immediately dissolved by the proximity of federal charges and financial ruin. Damon, however, was still staring at the floor, lost in the abyss of his own shattered control, unaware that I had just seen the final, most damning piece of evidence of his treachery. I finally stood, reaching for the signed documents, now my official title to freedom and wealth. "The conference call with my attorney is waiting," I said, my voice returning to its normal pitch, calm, professional, and utterly devoid of emotion. "You two have exactly 1 hour to vacate the premises. All of your personal effects will be cataloged and shipped to an address of your choosing, minus any items deemed corporate property, which will be retained for evidence." I glanced one last time at the tiny silver key, the final secret that had just confirmed his soul was rotten to the core. I left it there. Leaving the key was not an oversight. It was the final refined cruelty of my revenge. He would eventually find it or remember it, and know that his single, most brilliant, most comprehensive contingency plan, the plot that would have destroyed me utterly, had failed, rendering his entire calculating life strategy pointless. I walked out of the office, past the portrait of our smiling, oblivious past, and straight toward the door, not as a woman escaping a catastrophe, but as a queen who had just finished crushing a coup. Damon and Alara were left alone in the wreckage of their ambition, facing a life of lawsuits and destitution, forever haunted by the knowledge that the 34-year-old woman they thought they could outsmart was already 10 steps ahead, and my final victory was not in taking his money, but in guaranteeing that the man who wanted to steal my life would have nothing left to live for. The game was over. I had won.